Hello friends, and welcome back to our sessions. I can see some people have already joined. Hi Seema, hi Neha, hi Shaheen, hi Deepak. So today's session, a lot of few people requested in the past few sessions to do a questionnaire on C and C++. So the last few sessions have been around Java. Today's session we'll discuss some questions around C and C++. Now, before I start on with that, I would like to share a piece of information with those of you who are in and around Hyderabad. We have What Industry Want session tomorrow at 10 a.m. by Mr. V. Lakshmi Kant, MD, Broadridge Financial Solutions at HCU Gachibowli. So whoever of you can make use of this opportunity and join in tomorrow, make sure that you do, because there will be a lot of good tips and pointers shared by Mr. V. Lakshmikant to help you guys program and process the market, to help you guys understand what is going on in the industry, right? So this event, What Industry Wants, occurs once every month, and for those of you who are not in Hyderabad, these video clips are updated on this page, that is talentsprint.com and /WIW. So you can go to the page, and if you scroll down, you'll see past WIW sessions in the archives here. So just scroll this down. You'll find all the previous sessions that have taken place at the bottom here. So those of you who can join in, make sure that you make use of this opportunity. You'll get to hear a lot of good tips and pointers by Mr. V. Lakshmikant, and that will simply help you prepare yourself for the market that you are planning to dive into, right? So that's about WIW. Now, for the session today, we are going to talk about C and C++. Now, the last few sessions that we have seen, we have taken up several coding questions, right? Because you all were very interested in what kind of coding questions are asked in the interviews. So we talked about, let's say, I think the last session we took was on static and final. We saw some questions on that. We had some quizzes around the same to help you, practice more around the same topics that were discussed in the sessions. But before you actually go to the technical round, the programming round in an interview, being a fresher, you have to also sit through the prelim round, that is the concept round. So there would be the first round, ideally for a fresher, is where you have to explain your understanding of a particular concept in any language. Now down the line, maybe after 2 years of experience or 3 years of experience, all you will have is 2 or 3 rounds of coding interviews. But as a fresher, you'll always have 1 or 2 rounds of understanding of the concept, so that the interviewer or the company is able to assess how much you're aware of the language, what all do you know about the language. And while doing this, there are certain questions that all interviewers feel that if you know this particular question, then you are aware of all this that entails behind it, right? All these questions, C++ questions, I think you should be thoroughly prepared with, because the way you answer these questions give a very good understanding of how well you will be able to do when you code, right? If you're not able to project what your views or what your understanding of a concept is correctly to an interviewer, it might so happen that when you are going to write the code, you don't know what to do with it, because your understanding of the concept is fundamentally lacking somewhere, right? So keeping that in mind, today's session is about 20 commonly asked C++ questions, and these are all concept questions. So we'll go through each one of these slowly so that you have time to comprehend what the question is, and you have time to understand the solution, why we are discussing it, what is the background behind it, and any point of time, whatever doubts or queries you have, you can keep posting on the chat. So let's get started. Okay, I have a question from Aman Sinha. Can you tell me about direct eye company? Which kind of technical questions were asked? So the technical questions asked may differ from the person who's asking the question rather than the company. Companies don't have generally a defined format for at least interview questions. Based on whoever is taking your interview, questions kind of differ. So make sure your understanding of the basic concepts of whatever language you're preparing on is really thorough. Alright, starting off, what is the difference between structs and union? Students generally tend to mingle the two with each other. They don't understand the difference between structs and union. So this is kind of a very common question that I have seen being asked in interviews. So take your any takes on structs and union? Okay, let me start off with the first one. So a struct, as you see here, is a piece of code, a block of code that can have different type of data types. All right, it can have an integer, it can have char, it can have any different kind of data type inside a struct. Okay, while when you talk about a union, it's again the same. It's a block of code that has different type of data types inside it, right? So union also, as you see here, it has different type of data types inside it. But what essentially is the difference is, when you say struct can make use of these two different variables and initialize both of these values. So you can have a value in x, you can have a value in y. While in union, what happens is it stores the contents of a member variable at the exact same memory location. So the union B will have only one memory location. So either you can store x in it, or you can store character y in it, right? And depending on what value you are storing in this union, the other value will also change. So if you change the value of char y stored in this memory location, the value of int x would also change. So that is the essential difference between a struct and a union. In struct, you can have access to both these values, x and y. You have basically two memory locations storing two different values. While in a union, if you have two members inside a union, like this example, there would be one memory location or one placeholder where this value will be stored. Alright, jumping on to the next one. What is the difference between hash include when it is given in a quotes, when the file name is given in a quotes, to compare to when a file name is given in the braces? What is the difference between the two? Okay, meanwhile, while you guys answer this one, Sandesh has asked, can you please say what type of questions do Infosys ask in C, and do they want the correct answer or the correct approach? Sandesh, of course, if it is a theoretical question, you have to say the right answer. You have to be aware of what the concept is, and you have to place your words correctly to explain the actual concept that they have asked. But if it is a programmatical question, if they have asked you to code something, it might not always be important to give them the right answer. If you are not able to arrive at the answer, interviewers also look at what approach you have taken to solve your problem, because that shows them what is your logic behind solving the problem, right? and at times that is kind of enough to give them an idea of how competent you are to be hired as an employer. And this is not just for Infosys, for any company as such. Okay, so yeah, if it is a theory question, make sure you are answering correctly. And generally in theoretical question, if you answer one question, the next question would be framed around your answer only. If you use any keyword in your answer, they'll ask you the next question would come up from that keyword only. Okay, what do you mean by this word that you have used right now? That sort of chain forms. But in the coding questions, again, logic and your algorithm that you are trying to use to arrive at the answer, you might or you might not arrive at the right answer, because might have, you know, some coding issues, some semicolon missing somewhere, or a for loop going haywire. But if your logic is right, then I think you are in a good position. Amit answered the question for me. Struct has a separate memory location for each of its elements, right? So anyone for this? Hash include, what is the difference between when you include giving in quotes or when you include giving in braces? So the simple answer is, when you do it using quotes, your preprocessor looks for the file to be included in the same directory. So same directory is the key point here. It will not move out of the directory in which your current source file is. So if your source file, let's say, resides in this directory, this is your source file. If you try to hash includes given in quotes, it will search in this directory itself. It will not go out and search in the other directories. Alright? But while or when you do the same using braces, preprocessor searches for file in directories that are pre-designated by the compiler. So if the directories pre-designated by the compiler include all this, the search would happen in all these three directories. Alright, it will not be limited to the one where your source file is contained. So let me just demark it for you guys, if this is the one where your source file is contained, right? So if you call it by quotes, it will only search in the green one, the source file directory. But if you call it by braces, it will search in all these three directories. Alright? One is user made and one is predefined. Yeah, this with the quotes, the braces is predefined designated by the compiler. So these two are the keywords that you need to keep in mind when you are answering this question, that same directory for quotes and pre-designated by the compiler for braces. Alright, make sure you have these keywords in your answers whenever you are talking about theoretical concepts, because this is what explains essentially the difference between both, right? Next, what are dangling pointers and how are they different from memory leaks? So pointers, as you know, is like a very difficult concept for anyone who is appearing for a C++ interview, and make sure that you have a good grasp on it, because arrays and pointers are the two concepts on which most of the questions are asked, especially theoretical questions are asked in interviews. So what are dangling pointers and how are they different from memory leaks? While you guys are figuring this out, also make sure that you guys keep putting in topics of your interest for the next sessions whenever we have planned, so that we can take those topics accordingly. Okay, Harshit says, tell about practical codes. Harshit, this session we have kind of designed to talk about how to answer theoretical questions or conceptual questions when asked in interviews. So practical codes, maybe we can take up in the next session again. Let me know if there is any particular topic of your interest that you want to take up. All right. Pointers which are pointing location which is supposed to be free or which is now in free storage pool are called dangling pointers. Dharmendra has given an answer. Okay, Pranamya says, can you also make a video on Java? Yes, of course, there are multiple videos being made on Java and uploaded throughout this month. So keep a watch on the channel, subscribe to the channel so that you get updates whenever a Java video is uploaded. Alright, Selva is asking what is memory leaks. Let's give the answer. Dangling pointers are those that point to memory locations which have already been freed. Okay, so to explain this, let's say if you have this memory location that had some x is equal to 10 value assigned to it, right? Now let's say we have freed this memory location and now this memory location doesn't have this value. It's a blank memory location, it's a freed memory location, right? Now this free memory location, if there is a pointer that is pointing to this free memory location, would be called a dangling pointer because the memory location is freed but the pointer is still pointing to the memory location. Now what is memory leaks? Memory leaks happen when memory locations are not freed but there is no way to refer to them. So that means this link, this pointer link that you have that is referring to the memory location is gone. So this memory location would still have the value x is equal to 10, but there would be no way that you can access this memory location. So this kind of situation is known as memory leak. So make sure that, again, the keywords, make sure whenever you are answering these questions that you have your keywords right. Dangling pointers are pointing to the memory locations that have already been freed, while memory leaks are pointing to the location that are not freed but there is no way to refer to them. Alright. Now next, what is the difference between pre-increment and post-increment operator? Now we've already done a session on this. For those of you who were not there, I think this is an interesting question. For those of you who were there, I would expect an answer from you guys. Pre-increment and post-increment operator, what's the difference? If there is an integer, let's say x is equals to 10, pre-increment we do plus plus x and post-increment we do x plus plus. So what is the difference between these two? What happens to the values? Let's say we do a y is equals to plus plus x and a z is equals to x plus plus. Alright, so what will be the output of y and what will be the output of z? Give me the outputs, values of y and z. And remember, when we are talking about increment operators, they are also with minus minus. So you can also have a minus minus x and x minus minus. Again, this would be called a pre-decrement operator. And this is a post-decrement operator. Alright. Pre means use me first and then change the value, while in post, first value is changed. Alright, see, that means this is the kind of situation that you would want to avoid in your interview. You have your concept right, but you have just interchanged what you mean to say. Pre means increment me first and then use, while post means first use me and then increment me. Alright, so Dharmendra, you see there, you know it, you have the concept in your mind correctly, but you just put it out wrongly, and that gives this, if you give this answer in an interview, the interviewer can grill you further on pre and post. So the next question would be, okay, this is the piece of code on pre and post, what will be the output? Because then he gets to know that you have your concept haywire. Yeah, so most of you have given the answer right. Y 11 and Z would be 10, because Y will increment X plus. It will make it 11 and then assign it to Y, while in this case it will assign 10 to Z and then increment the value of X. Alright, so this is the standard pre-post increment operation. So when you have to answer for the concept, then you will have to answer it in this format. Now, depending on what kind of, if pre and post increment is asked in a coding question, you have a series of pre-post increments. Then based on the operations that are performed and based on what kind of pre and post increment, in what kind of sequence they are being done, the sequence might change here and there. You can go back to the free class that we did on pre and post increment to understand that better. But if you talk about the concept of pre-increment or pre-decrement operators, this is what happens exactly. All right. Now, next one. So this is pre-increment operator, is used to increment value by 1 before assigning, and same thing written. Now, what is and star operator in C? You would have seen both these operators while writing code around pointers in C. What are both these used for? And star. Again, very subtle difference in both of these, but you need to make sure that you have it right when you are explaining this. This one is more easy, I would say, to understand when a piece of code is given, because you get to see what each one of these is doing. But when you are asked and you have to explain, then what would be the proper choice of words? So star operator is used as a pointer to a variable. Example you have here, star A, where star is a pointer to variable A. So you can say y equals to star A. And operator is used to get the address of the variable. So it is and A. When you do z is equals to and of A, you get the address of variable A, right? Okay, that is the simple difference between star. For if you want the value, you use star. If you want the address, you go for and. Deepak says, please clear my doubt. Deepak, I'm sorry I missed your question. Let me go back. Depends on compiler to compiler. No, it doesn't depend on compiler to compiler. It has a very clear meaning that pre-increment means you increment first and then assign, and post-increment means you assign first and then increment. This doesn't change compiler to compiler. This might, vary at times when you are doing, again, like I said, when you are doing a long series of code and depending on the chain of sequence of operators. Let's say you have something like plus plus y star z minus x plus t minus minus, something like this, a long series of operations. Then you might have to worry about what would be the final value that is stored in xyz variable, let's say. This is where you need to be a bit cautious in these long chain operations, but other than that, the answer or the solution is fairly simple for this. Alright, moving on. Pawan is worried about why the girls are not answering. Yeah, I'm also worried, Pawan, why the girls aren't answering all these questions. Alright, moving on. What is the use of goto statement? Now again, this, remember the chaining of concepts. When you are learning concepts, remember what is coming from where. Goto statements are generally found in loops, either it be while or it be for, etc. All these looping chains, or even in general block of piece of code, you might see some insert lines, right? And then there could be a goto statement and the further piece of code. So what does goto do in your program? Also remember to practice all these loops properly: while, for, do while, switch case. Goto is used to jump to a particular label. What do you mean by label? Again, the label I would say is, yeah, the correct use, but you should be able to explain what a label is. Right, so goto statement is used to transfer the normal flow of a program to the specified label in the code. Now, like I said, when you answer conceptual questions, depending on what your answer is, your next question is framed. So like Dharmendra said, goto is used to jump to a particular label. Now next question, Dharmendra, to you could be, what is a label, right? And then you should be able to explain what a label is and how it is created. Like the piece of code shown here, we have written goto statement and we have given the label. Now the label would have some statement there. Now wherever your label comes in the program, it is kind of a pointer that jump to this line. You don't give line numbers actually, so you don't say go to a particular line of code, you go to a particular label. So wherever that label is mentioned in the code, whenever the goto statement is encountered, the program flow will skip all the lines in the middle and directly go from here to the label, right? That is the simple explanation for both goto and label. Now, what is extern and static function in C? These I have seen most people get confused with. Difference between extern and static. I think for whoever was wondering that a girl is not answering, finally we have Bhavya who answered this right. Goto is used to alter the normal sequence. Bhavya, for you the next question could be how we alter the normal sequence using goto. So then you can talk about how labels are used in the code. Satyam has said it performs a one-way transfer of control to another line of code. In contrast, a function call normally returns control. I like the way you have explained it, that it is a one-way transfer of control to another line of code. Of course, if you have a goto and your code reaches to this line, it is definitely one way. You cannot then come back to this goto label. While rightly said, in a function call, if here you have had a function call, let's say you're calling a function student. So this will go to the function student wherever it is defined, execute the set of lines in there, and finally it will return back to this to execute the next line. That's a very interesting way to say it. It's a one-way transfer of control. And it also tells at the same time that you are aware that a function call is two-way because it returns control. Alright, we moved on to the next one. Dharmendra has answered it. If variable is defined outside .c file, then we use extern variable. Okay. Static variable who are given memory only once. Alright. So your definitions, Dharmendra, are kind of both there, but you are, I think, missing the exact thing that you have to say. Anyone else would like to give it a shot before I show you the answer? All right. So by default, any function that is defined in a C file is extern. Okay, and these functions can be used in any other source file of the same project which has many other files. So let's say we have created a project by the name student. Okay, this you'll not be able to see. Let me redo that. Let's say you have a project by the name student. All right, now this project could have multiple files. Let's say it has 5 files. Okay, now when you define a function that is by default as extern, or if you give the extern keyword, these functions can be used in any other source file of the same project. So let's say your function is defined in the file number 2 and you want to use it in file number 5 of your project. You can do that, right? But when we declare or define a function as static, these functions cannot be used in other files of the same project. So if you want to limit a function to a particular file of the project, let's say you have a function that you want specifically for file number 4, you will declare that function as a static function. All right, while anything that you want to be accessed by other files in the project, that would go as a extern, or by default as an extern. Yeah, so extern is, I would say, shared, because they can be used multiple times in multiple files and declared at one place. So the function declared in 2 can be used in 5, right? Okay, when we declare a member of a class is static, it means no matter how many objects of the class are created, there is only one copy of this static member. All right, that is kind of going on the Java lines, but yeah. What should I do to increase my way of answering the questions in interviews? There's actually, simply you can just go back to your concepts, read through your practice books or online from wherever you are preparing. Make sure that you note the keywords that are there to explain a particular concept. Like for static function, you would definitely want to keep in mind the fact that these functions cannot be used in other files of the same project, right? So everything that you define would have some such keywords, like in the previous examples that we have seen. Let's see which one. Yeah, in this one. So already been freed or not freed, these two are the main pointers that would differentiate dangling pointers from memory leaks, right? You don't want to mess this up. You don't want to do dangling pointers not freed and memory leaks already been freed, right? Although you might have the concept clear in your head, when you are explaining it to someone else, you need to have these things sorted. So I think just the mere fact that you go through your concept books nicely, read it nicely, don't just go through it when you're preparing for an interview. Don't just skim through it. Take a pause, to understand what exactly is the key word here in this particular concept. What one word is defining this whole concept, right? So just a little attention, I would say, to whenever you are reading your concepts would be enough for you to answer these questions better. And remember, if you are using any other keyword while explaining, like the goto label situation, if you say label, you should be able to explain what a label is. All right? Otherwise, it feels like you have mugged up the definition from somewhere and you actually don't know what the concept is. Okay, moving on to the next one. Can a variable be both volatile and constant in C? So you know what a volatile variable is and what a constant is. Can there be a variable that is both volatile and constant. It's a simple yes or no answer. Now depending on whether you answer yes or no, again the interviewer would ask you next, why do you think so? Or he will give you a piece of code which would be explaining something else from what you have said, and then he'll ask you to explain, okay, this piece of code I have written, in this it doesn't happen like that, why? So you need to be fully aware of what is a volatile variable, what is a constant variable, and whether or not a variable can be both. So yeah, yes or no for this one? Alright, I have a question. Are you going to be solving some tricky outputs in C++ today? Now today's session is simply on how to go through your first two round of conceptual question answering. So this is going to be limited to questions that are frequently asked in theoretical questions, precisely, that are frequently asked in interviews. Now if you want some particular topic, because coding questions have a vast topic, if you want some particular topic to be discussed around coding in the next session, then you can just drop in a comment here. Please make a video on resume making. There are so much questions like difference between interest and hobbies, etc. Alright Dharmendra, I'll see to it. I'll note this point. I'll try if we can make a video on resume making. That might actually help quite a lot of you, because resume is your first impression whenever you are in an interview. Before you actually go there and make your impression, your resume makes your impression for you. Alright, yes, and the answer is yes. Constant modifier does not allow changing the value of the variable by internal program. Alright, you cannot change the variable value by the internal program, but you can do it externally, and volatile variables value may change at any time. So that is the reason why both these keywords can be used for a variable. Next one, what does the following declaration mean? Is it an array? Is it a pointer pointing to an array? Is it an array of pointers? What does this mean? It's a very simple question, right? If you are sitting next to an interviewer, he'll just write this line and he'll ask you, what is it? While you guys answer this, Rohit has asked what kind of programming questions are asked in MCAT. MCAT programming questions are fairly simple. They are kind of easy to comprehend. Majorly you'll have increment decrement operators, assignment operators, you'll have arrays, you'll have I think collections could be part of it. Very basic simple structure there is to MCAT, because non-IT people also go for MCAT. So the structure is fairly simple, the questions are fairly simple. If your concepts are brushed up nice, MCAT is easy to crack. But for interviews, you might have to practice more on the coding bit. We need the OOPS concepts. We have done a live session previously. You can go back and refer to it, and if there is anything more that you are looking for in particular, again I'm asking this repeatedly to all of you because I'm pretty sure there are certain concepts that you might find difficulty with. So it's good that you let us know, and then we all can talk about those topics in the next sessions. Chaitanya, HTML in detail would not be probably possible in one session. I I'll see if I can maybe bring it up as part of a session, because I think most of the students are looking for C, C++ or Java, but I'll try to keep it in mind. A variable can be both volatile. Ayush. Okay, Satyam says array of pointer. And what else? Pointer to array of size 10. Array of pointer, I'm getting both ways. Either it is an array of pointer or it is a pointer to an array of size 10. Array variable is also a pointer, but it has a name so that we can refer to it. Okay. Sahil said array pointer which can point up to 10 elements. I'm impressed by the variety of answers I'm getting for this. It's a very simple answer, guys. Video on tricky output questions when it comes to pointers. All right. Anonymous array. It is not an anonymous array. Hemant is asking difference between star p equals to a and p equals to ampersand a. Please explain the difference. Okay, when you use ampersand, you are storing the address of a in p. Okay, while when you use star p, you have created a pointer to the variable a. That is all. Okay, now that you all have given a shot to this, pointer ptr is a pointer to an array of 10 integers. So this int means there is an array of 10 integers, and ptr is a pointer to that array of 10 integers. Fine? Yeah, pointers I feel are kind of tricky for you guys, because most of you have answered it. I think there was a 50-50 on whether it's an array of 10 integers or whether it's a array of 10 pointers. Okay, moving on. What function should be used to free the memory allocated by calloc? So there can be many questions around this memory allocation, deallocation, right? So you need to be aware of all the functions, calloc, malloc, free, etc., etc., whatever functions are there. You should be aware of what each and every function is doing and how are the functions different from each other. So I've given you options for this one. What function should be used to free the memory allocated by calloc? A, B, C or D? Free. Yeah, free is the right answer. Next one. What is the difference between new and malloc? Calloc I'll come to later. I see someone has asked me what is the difference between calloc and malloc. We'll come to that later. But for now, what is the difference between new and malloc? Okay, Rohit has asked, knowing OOPS concepts, that is polymorphism, inheritance, etc., and C++ syntax, How to learn Java? Rohit, if you know OOPS concept and you know C++ syntax, learning Java should be fairly simple for you, because the basics that are there in C++, that is, conditional constructs, your looping constructs, switch case, for, etc., all these things as it is come to Java. The syntax also remains the same. What Java adds on top of that with OOPS concept is classes. So you need to be aware of how classes are declared, abstraction, how abstraction is achieved, interface declaration, all those concepts I think should be easy for you. So the initial few, if I talk about the basic flow of learning Java, the initial few chapters or the lessons for you should be easy till you actually get introduced to class. So you can fairly simply go ahead and start off from how to declare a class, how to create an object, how to achieve abstraction or inheritance or polymorphism using classes, those kind of concepts. And it should be very easy for you if you know already the syntax of one language. Okay, new and malloc, coming back to that. So few points that I want you to remember when you are talking about new and malloc. New initializes the allocated memory by calling the constructor. So new is a fairly simple call, right? It's a default call. You call the constructor and you initialize the memory. And memory allocated with new is released with delete. Now malloc allocates uninitialized memory, and the allocated memory has to be released with free. Now malloc doesn't have a constructor associated to it. With malloc you have to specify, there is the parameter which specifies the size of the memory. Malloc allocated requested bytes in memory. Yes, correct, Vineet. You have to specify the bytes. Now what calloc does is, with calloc you have two parameters. One tells you whether it's int or char or whatever, and the other tells you size. So if it is not byte, then the size would come here. That is the difference between malloc and calloc. Next, what is the difference between function overloading and operator overloading? Function overloading, I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of. When you use the same name and different parameters to give another definition to a function, that becomes function overloading. But what is operator overloading? How do you do operator overloading? Take a minute and think of how operator overloading is achieved. Dharmendra, new and delete are specific to C++. There's no new delete expression in C. The closest equivalent that you have to new and delete in C is malloc and free functions. Okay, operator overloading. When you overload an operator, you are essentially giving it a definition that for this particular operator, and if I add these many arguments, do this particular thing. So you have a return type, you say operator, and @ simply gives you the symbol. So let's say you want to overload plus operators, so you will have plus in the place of @. And let's say you have argument list. Now Normal integer addition you can do by using plus straight away, like 25 plus 30 plus 40, etc. You don't need to overload your plus operator. But in some situations, if you don't have an integer or a float value that for which you cannot directly use plus, right, but you want the addition operation and you know what this addition operation should do, you give those arguments as the argument list, and in this body you define how this plus operator will work on these three arguments, and finally whatever your answer is would be returned, and return type is already specified. So this is how you overload your operators. Sometimes the question is asked like, what keyword do you use to overload operators? So this is the keyword. Operator keyword is used to overload operators in Java, right? So @ is simply a placeholder. This can be anything, plus, minus, modulus, whatever operator that you would want to overload. An argument list, again, how many ever values that you see that would come to this operator. You provide those argument list in a return type, right? Next one, what is dynamic binding? Sometimes in interviews, it's also referred to as late binding. Because dynamic binding students are generally familiar with, late binding they get confused. How would you call an overloaded operator? It's fairly simple. When you want to call an overloaded operator, if you're calling plus, right, and you're giving those arguments inside, that means that this is not the normal plus, this is your operator overloaded plus, and then that value would be stored in the variable. So if the return type is int, you will have an int variable where this function call would store the value, right? It's a normal function call like any other function call. Okay, dynamic binding. Difference, Dharmendra has asked difference between method, function and procedure. Okay, the simplest way to explain this is between function and procedure, a function would return you a value, right? Like here we have a return type. A function would have a return type, it would return you a value, while a procedure just take parameters and perform some operations, or doesn't take parameters, perform some operation. It does not return you a value, right? And coming to method, method is a term that is exclusively used in, I think, object oriented programming only, and it is the integral part of a class, so it cannot move out of the class like a function can be called from other classes, etc. Method is limited to the class. Pranamya says overriding. Yeah, dynamic binding is overriding. So any binding that your compiler cannot do, essentially. So the parameters are not defined at the compile time, or you're waiting for some value that some other function would run and give it to you. Because of that, the binding cannot be done at compile time. In all those situations, the binding happens at runtime. that is late binding, that is also dynamic binding, and that is also overriding, right? It's a process of linking procedure call to a specific sequence of code at runtime. Correct, Arun. Dynamic binding, also known as late binding, means that the code associated with the given procedure call is not known until the time of the call at runtime. So when your program is actually running and you reach that particular line, that is only when the binding actually happens. What is the difference between class and structure? Moving on, class and structure. Members of a structure are public, while that for class are private. Okay, that is the first difference. Then structure doesn't provide data hiding. That is provided by classes, and structure would contain only data. So if you have a structure, it would have only data members, while if you have a class, it can have data as well as functions that operate on the data. All right, structures are public by default. Class, you can have public or private, but the idea of using a class is that your members are private, right? That's the difference between a structure and a class. What else I have got here? Structure can be referred to as a user defined data type possessing its own operations. Kind of, yeah. I would actually not say it like that, because then you have to explain what operations you are referring to, because functions are not part of a structure. So how structure does operations, what are you referring to, kind of are the questions that come next. Okay, Ayush says by default all the members in class are private, while in structure by default all the members are public. Yeah. Okay, next, what is the difference between implicit and explicit conversion? Again, this we have talked about in one of our previous sessions, conversions. What is the difference between implicit and explicit conversion? So conversion questions are kind of in addition to your increment, decrement or assignment operator questions. So whenever there is a question around an operator, precedence or assignment, increment, decrement, logics while performing assignments, implicit and explicit conversions also can come into picture, because they make your code more complicated. Sometimes there is a piece of code in which there is an explicit conversion being done without explicitly saying it, and that means that the code should give error, but students generally don't notice it and they give the output based on simple conversion. So implicit and explicit, the simplest way to explain this is, if you are doing a conversion from small to big data type, wider conversion, that is done implicitly. So if int is to be converted to float, let's say you have a variable int x is equals to 10 and you have a float y, and you say y equals to x. This is an implicit conversion because you are converting smaller, that is integer, to bigger, that is float. But if it is the other way around, you convert big to small. And if we have the same code, let's say int x is equals to 10, sorry, let's say we haven't initialized x, int x, and we have float y is equals to 10.2. Now if you do x is equals to y, what would happen? Give me the output of what is the value of x when you do x is equals to y. There is a simple integer variable x, float y, initialized to 10.2, and you are moving x is equals to y. Yeah, GSS says implicit conversion is done by compiler. Yes, you don't have to mention anything in the code to explicitly say that you have to do a conversion. So that is taken care of by the compiler. Sandesh gave me answer 10. Correct. This will also happen, but the value in x will be 10 because x is an integer, and this floating point value of 0.2 you will lose while you are doing this conversion, right? Now there are times when you have to explicitly mention that you are trying to store a particular kind of value in a particular kind of variable, and this is how you do that. You're saying explicitly to convert it into float. So the syntax is simple brace, a float or double whatever inside this, and then your variable. That is the syntax. Okay, next, what is a copy constructor? You see, we have kind of brushed through most of the concepts of C, C++ that could probably be asked in an interview. Make sure to remember all the points, that keep the keywords in mind, keep your answers straight and clear. If you don't know any definition, like you cannot explain what you want to explain, try to explain it through an example or a pseudocode kind of explanation, so that your interviewer understands that you are able to comprehend what the actual concept is. So a copy constructor is a method that accepts an object of the same class and copies its members to the object on the left part of the assignment. So a copy constructor will take the object of the same class and will assign it to the new object. Let us say obj1, and let us say obj2 was already created, right? So it will take the object of the same class and copy its members to the new object. That is simply a copy constructor. Next question could be, after copy constructor, what is the difference between copy constructor and overloaded assignment operator? Yes, I mean that it will copy all variables of one object to another object. Now, what is overloaded assignment operator? When we want to initialize a new object with already existing object, then we use copy constructor. Yes. So an overloaded assignment operator assigns the contents of an existing object to another existing object of the same class. Now the simple difference is, in a copy constructor, the objects of an existing object are assigned, let's say obj1 is the existing object. So these contents are assigned to a new object, while in overloaded assignment operator, the contents are assigned to another object that is already created. Say obj2 is already created. That is the difference between overloaded assignment operator and copy constructor. Okay, what is the difference between message and method? I'm very happy to see that most of you are aware of all of this. All the questions that we have seen so far, most of you have answered them correctly. It's just a matter of putting the words at the right place. Message and method. So a message, object communicate by sending a message to each other. Okay, so you send a message from your calling code to a function and then again get the value back through a message, while a method provides response to a message and it is an implementation of an operation. So this is what your method is, and this, the call that happens, is your message. So these are kind of two different things, but students confuse them, or the interviewer tries to at times confuse the students with message and method. So objects communicate by sending messages to each other. So if we have two objects, obj1 and say xyz1, these communicate with each other through messages, correct? A message is sent to invoke a method. From here you will call a method, and a method provides this response to the message. It will return a value or not return a value or do some certain steps, right? And it is an implementation of an operation. All right, how can you reallocate pointers while coding? Vinod, you have answered with reference to Java. Let's try to frame your answer with simple reference to C only. That's also kind of the right answer, but if you have to explain it through C without giving reference of Java, how would you do that? That means messages are not arguments. It's just a call to your function that's not exactly present in your code. You will not see in your piece of code. You'll just write your method call and compiler takes care of how the calling happens. Realloc function. Yeah, realloc is the function. So here you have variable str assigned 15, right? Now if you want to reallocate it to 25, this is the syntax to do that. Realloc str to 25 and then store it back to str. Fine. What is the difference between late binding and early binding? Now I think this should be pretty clear considering we have already taken a look at late binding. So early binding is overloading, late binding is overriding. Early binding is static, late binding is dynamic. All right. In these different terms, you can be asked the difference between both, right? Early, late, difference between both. All are the same, correct? Just have to remember what terminology is used for runtime and what terminology is used for compile time. I think other than that, all of you would be already aware of what this is. Early binding, overloaded functions, normal functions. Late binding is virtual binding, virtual functions. All right. So that's it for the session, guys. I have seen some of you have given pointers around what you want to be taken up in the next session. Pointers, and I got a few more topics. If there is anything else that you would want to discuss in the next session, that would be next to next Friday again, drop in the comments. And if there's anything else also that you would like to discuss, let me know. A video was requested around tricky output questions, so I'll see to it when that can come up. Maybe I'll update you about it in the next free live session that we have. Vandana has asked a question, is that when we are reallocating the data, when we stored using malloc, is lost when reallocated? Malloc is, it gives you memory space, right? It will not, deallocate your data. It will give you more space or less space. If you do it less space, you might lose data, but if you are increasing the space, you won't lose the data. Resume making, yes, Dharmendra, right? One video for you on resume making. Anything else? I would, of course, go back to this chat and see if I have missed on some points that you guys have said to take up in the next session. And even after the session, if you guys remember anything, drop in a comment. And whoever in Hyderabad, join the WIW session tomorrow. And whoever not in Hyderabad, don't get disappointed. You can watch the sessions and take tips online. Just go to the link talentsprint.com/WIW, and the videos will be pretty soon updated in the channel. All right. Vinod is asking, early binding is called method overloading. Yeah, early binding is not overriding. Early binding is overloading. Late binding is overriding. Ayush says, got to learn new concepts. Great, Ayush, that you learn new concepts. I hope my idea behind this was that you guys are able to understand how to answer conceptual questions, because all of you are of course aware of all the concepts, but at times you are not able to project your answers correctly, and that lands your interview in trouble. So try to keep the tips in mind. Multi-threading in Java. Okay, next Java session, I'll keep multi-threading in mind. Can we use realloc in place of malloc? Dharmendra, you need to assign memory allocation, right? Before you actually reallocate it. So malloc, realloc cannot be a replacement for malloc. Once you have assigned using malloc, you can use realloc if you want to change. All right, guys. Have a nice weekend. I'll see you in the next session.